On this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, I welcome Freddie Owens back to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Today is part 2 of a powerful 2-part series. Freddie shares more from his journey growing up in Milwaukee and the powerful stories behind his upcoming memoir, Echoes of Stark Park, from the lessons learned on the courts of Stark Park to a Division I career at the University of Wisconsin. This episode is about resilience, growth, and legacy. This will be a good one. Here we go. We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim DeCora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. The podcast is where we feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. Today, I'm glad to be joined in the Buck and Honey's remote studios via cell phone by Milwaukee native and former Badger basketball player Freddie Owens. He's here to share his story and the experiences that will be featured in his upcoming memoir, Echoes of Stark Park, set for release on Monday, February 16th of this year, 2026. So we've heard some of the really, really good stuff, and there's a couple of things in there that we talked about here in the intermission about some of the touching things that were going on outside of some of the negative things, and it was really good to hear. And now we're going to talk about some of the struggles growing up in Milwaukee in the 80s and 90s. So since the show has a mental health component to it, you mentioned in some of the notes that we shared back and forth that you were experiencing some anxiety throughout your early life due to growing up in a high crime area and an unstable home life. Specifically, drop a couple of experiences or stories that we maybe given a little peek into the book on what they're going to be hearing. You're going to touch on a little bit. So go ahead and talk about a couple of specific things from the book.
All right. So, growing up in Milwaukee in the 80s and 90s was tough. You know, on the north side of Milwaukee, a lot of high crime areas, you know, where you dealt with drugs, poverty, gangs, things of that nature. So, you know, trying to navigate those things as a young kid were really tough because you were getting exposed to so many things that kids shouldn't get exposed to, when it relates to those topics. And growing up, I seen a lot of things that kids shouldn't see. You know, in my household alone, there was a lot of addiction going on with my mom. I grew up with, a mom who was addicted to crack cocaine, which was very prevalent in the inner city of Milwaukee in the 80s and 90s, the crack epidemic, they call it. And, unfortunately, she was a victim of that. So growing up, my childhood was really challenging because the person that I loved most, my mom, she was going through a lot of struggles with addiction. There was nights where she was never home because she was out trying to find that next high or trying to get that next fix. And some of these things are, even to this day, when I kind of think about them, it brings back a lot of emotion because just trying to navigate that was really tough as a kid. And my dad, he struggled as well, trying to figure out ways to help her through her addiction. And for the readers who will get the book and read it, I go into, explicit details on what that was like and what it felt like. And, it's just a very challenging time for me growing up. And throughout the neighborhood, there was a lot of other kids going through those same things, so we were all able to lean on each other as it related to going through those experiences. And without those relationships, I just don't know what would have became of me as a 11, 12, 13-year-old kid growing up in the inner city of Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think of you, and when I think of Freddie Owens, I think of the Badger basketball player, and you hit the shot, and there's a soft side to you as well that you connected with a then 33 or 34-year-old coach and teacher from Wanakee, and you let me into your world. And some people think of men's basketball players, Division I players, and they're into themselves and they're with their teammates. But you let me into your world, and we've stayed kind of semi-connected since then. And it's just, to know that we've kind of traveled the same paths, that I also had a mother who was in addiction, alcoholism, and a father who was in the same boat. And we were, when you talked about your mom sometimes not coming home, I had the same experience, and that caused a lot of anxiety of where is she? Why isn't she coming home? Is there something wrong? And then even looking into did I do something? What were some of the symptoms that you now know are classic signs of anxiety that you were going through? Talk about those.
One of them would be, just lack of sleep. You're always wondering, where's mom? When is she coming home? Hopefully you don't get bad news that she turns up dead somewhere, because, you saw that a lot with addicts growing up in Milwaukee, where, overdoses or violent disputes with drug dealers. I mean, there's a million things that kind of run through your mind at that age, where you worry. For me, I worried about my mom. And then there was the other aspect too, where you're out and about on the parks or in the neighborhood, and you worry about being involved of something where you're a victim of violence, guns and gangs and drugs. So as it relates to anxiety, you don't realize at the time that you're going through these things, at that age, especially back then, nobody talked about anxiety or anything of that nature, in the 80s and 90s, especially in the inner city of Milwaukee, because it was kind of a badge that you wore from a standpoint of you didn't want to be seen as being weak. You were raised to be tough and to get through whatever it is that you're going through. And people didn't really take the time to kind of peel back the layers or try to understand mental health like they do now. So, if you're in situations such as myself where you were going through a lot of these things and being exposed to a lot of these things as a kid that you shouldn't have been exposed to at that age or ever in life, really, you don't really look at it that way. You're trying to, hide certain things that you're feeling because you don't want to present the perception that you're soft, so to speak, because that's just the way it was growing up in Milwaukee, about being tough and figuring it out and getting through the things that you were going through at that point. So from an anxiety standpoint, those were some of the things looking back now that as a kid I experienced, just the lack of sleep and always the constant worry of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unfortunately, when you hear about Milwaukee, some of those same things still exist to this day, with the crime rate and the poverty and the drugs and things of that nature. What I will say, though, the difference between now and then was that there was a lot more of a support system I felt in the community, in the neighborhoods. And that's where Stark Park comes into place. That's the reason why I titled the book what I did, because being on that park every day, going through a lot of the things that I experienced, saved my life, so to speak. And, my family was there. That's one thing that I was lucky. My family was always there, aunts and cousins, things of that nature. Those people were still there, present in my life and helping me in the best way that they could. But, with that park, it provided me an outlet to do something that I loved doing, and that was playing basketball. And, whenever I stepped in between those lines, it was an escape from everything that was going on around me. So I tell people I truly believe that park helped save my life, because I could have easily veered off to the other side where I dabbled in drugs and gangs and things of that nature. But, I had basketball as kind of my grounding force, in addition to my father, who was an awesome dad, who pushed me, to be the best that I could be. There's other kids that I know that grew up with parents too, and they went that direction even with good parenting. So, yeah, if it wasn't for that park, who knows, man? I don't know what I would have turned out to be.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to bring up, and it's probably a similar experience because we talked about in the intermission, is that I had a younger brother who had to grow up in the same situation I did, and he went in a different direction. This is blood. I played college basketball, and I played high school basketball, and some similar experiences to you. And then he went in another direction. One of the stories he mentioned, and you talked a little bit about this, is he was out in Las Vegas, and and he loved basketball and playing too. And he was out hooping on this court in Las Vegas with like 6 courts, and all of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. There's gunfire, and he drops along with all these other 6 courts that are playing, and then the people that are watching, they drop, pop, pop. The gunfire stops, and then everybody looks around. Anybody hit? Nope. All right, they get back up. All right, whose ball was it? Skins? All right, check it up, and then they start playing. And all 6 courts do the same thing. It was just common thing, he said. And I was totally blown away. And then you mentioned that some of that was going on as well in Milwaukee. Talk about your experiences with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's countless times where you'd be on the park, whether it's Stark Park or another park, throughout the city, where same situation, you're playing and all of a sudden gunshots rang out and everybody drops or either runs and leaves the park and then come back and then make sure that everybody's back and the teams are aligned the way they were before the gunshots went off, and recall the score, and then you check it up and you continue playing like nothing ever happened. And looking back on that, it's just like you're thinking like, wow, like how were we able to just do that in that type of situation? But you just become so accustomed to it, where it's just like it's normal for whatever reason. You kind of normalize it, and you make sure nobody's harmed, and then you just you continue on with your game like nothing happened. And it's crazy. I mean, I've been a victim of some of those situations. I mean, I've been shot at 3 different times in my childhood growing up in Milwaukee, and there was definitely a higher power above watching over me, because in each one of those situations it's unexplainable how I walked away unharmed, in those instances. And I just thank the Lord to this day that still around to share those stories with the readers and with your audience and with people that I've told the stories to. But yeah, I mean, 3 different times growing up in Milwaukee where direct gunfire was aimed at me, and somehow I walked away unscathed. And unfortunately, you hear it on the news every day. People who are in those situations, they don't walk away as lucky, as I did.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But then, listeners are probably thinking, well, how does he go back to then just playing basketball? And it might be the violence, it might be the gangs, it might be the gunfire, it might be something at home. For my experience is, do I go back home and go into that alcoholic home life, or do I just check it up and, all right, what was the score? And then bounce it back in and we start playing. But that was the coping skill. And that was your coping. It was the only thing you knew was, well, let's go play because I feel good about that. Even though there's this stuff going on the external stuff, I feel at home. Like you said, I got chills when you said I stepped inside those lines, and those lines were like invisible barriers, force field, and we just played and I had fun, and that's how you were coping. Who were you leaning on for support in your life during this time?
Like I said, my family, I was fortunate, because I have friends who were less fortunate, where they didn't have the family element to lean back on. But my family was always there. But my friends, I mean, they're the ones who helped me get through a lot of tough times. I had a core group of friends. It's 4 guys that were just those are my guys. We spent almost every waking moment together, on and off the park. A lot of similar situations going on in the households. And we just leaned on each other for support. We were able to talk to one another and help, one another through those tough times. Sometimes, it was just a lot of things went unspoken. We knew what each other was going through because we were around each other so much, where we would just go outside and play ball in the park. We'd go to Stark Park and we play 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 or 5-on-5. And that was all of our escape. We would escape through the game, and it got all of us through a lot of really tough times at that point in our lives. I mean, what the average reader or audience don't understand, especially people that are not from that area is that, we were getting exposed to things that, like, it would make your jaw drop. 10, 11, 12 years old, getting exposed to things that grown men shouldn't even be exposed to, or anyone for that matter. And we were just taught to kind of just shake it off and move on. It's just the environment that we were in. And, we didn't have a lot of time to dwell or reflect on anything that was going on around us because, you're just being thrusted right back into it, moment by moment and day by day situation. So you just kind of took it and brushed it off and moved on and dealt with whatever was in front of you at the time.
I think what you're going to do for folks in the Madison area or Badger basketball fans who are going to pick the book up because it says Freddie Owens on it and they remember Freddie Owens in the shot, they're going to start reading into this, and there's going to be a lot of people have respect for you as a basketball player, coach, teacher now, and just a person that brought a lot of good experiences to their lives for the 4 years that you wore the Badger red with the W across your chest. And now people are going to get an opportunity to find out, what you went through, which was probably at times insurmountable to get to where you were. And probably nothing affected you on the court because you were hardened from the life you had grown up in. And you also brought that vibe of teammates and family and looking after one another and representing the Pergolders of Washington in high school and the Badgers in college. And you just went about your life of being successful, but it all started somewhere. So when you and I talked a couple of weeks ago, you reached out. We started with some messaging on Facebook, and then we finally got connected via phone. We talked about your upcoming book and why you decided to write your memoir. And some people are going to think, well, he wants to write the memoir to talk about his life growing up, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. So tell us some of those motivating factors that made you put pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard.
So I wrote it as a legacy piece for my son. When he was born, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, when he was born, my whole outlook and perspective on life immediately shifted the moment he was brought into this world, and started thinking more and more about my parents and the legacy that they left to me and how it's helped shape and mold me into the man that I am today. And then I started thinking more and more about my relationship with my parents. They were around and I knew them, but then the more I started to think about it and the more questions that kind of came about when I started peeling back the layers of my relationship with my parents, I started to realize that I didn't know them as well as I thought. And then I started to think about wow, there's so many unanswered questions because my parents are dead and gone now. They're passed on. And as a middle-aged man, there's a lot of questions that I have for them that won't get answered as it relates to fatherhood and being a parent and life in general, as a middle-aged man. And I started to think about my son and I'm like, wow, I knew my parents, but I don't know them as well as I thought I did. And I don't want that for him. So that's where the idea of putting pen to paper, fingers to keyboard kind of came about, where I wanted to write a legacy piece for my son to be able to pick up in all aspects of his life, at any point in his life where he can pick up something and reference what his dad was going through at that point in his life and have a connection between him and myself that will go far beyond anything else, long past when I'm dead and gone, and even something that he can pass down, to his kids as it relates to building that connection. So I didn't want that for my son. I didn't want him to have as many unanswered questions, when he gets older in life and when I'm passed on and gone. I want him to know as many aspects about me as possible, so to speak. So that was the motivation and the reason behind it. But then it's interesting, once I started writing, then everything kind of took on a life of its own, where I started to realize, okay, this is why I want to write the book. But then I started to realize that this book can help a lot of people who may be struggling in some aspect of life, whether it's a middle-aged man or it's a young kid growing up in an inner city surrounded by violence and crime, or, a young kid that's, coming from a tough upbringing where there's a broken home. I mean, there's so many different layers to this and so many different points that you can touch with this, and start to think more about, like, this book can help a lot of people. So, that's when I decided to try to go the publishing route with it, because it was something that I just was going to write and shelve for my son when he got older to read it. And it took on a life of its own, and here we are today talking about it.
I started doing the same thing about 2.5 years ago when I was out telling my story, speaking to schools and libraries and businesses and colleges, and somebody asked me, "Are you writing a book on this stuff?" And I giggled and laughed, and then I heard it a second time, and then finally the third time, I was like, maybe I should start writing a book about this. And I did the same thing. The therapy for me in writing a book and revisiting some of those hard situations that I suppressed a long, long time ago, and then for a long time started coming back out. And then now for me, it's very comfortable to talk about, I grew up in an alcoholic home, and I had struggles of my own, that things I used to suppress I can talk comfortably about them because it's therapy for me, and I know it's going to help somebody else maybe start talking about what went on in their lives. And it sounds like that maybe has happened for you a bit, is that you started writing about it, fingers to keyboard, and then it became easier to revisit these things, and now they're coming out, and I got to believe there's a little therapy in there. And then when you're writing a book, and yes, we were writing it because of the legacy piece, and we want to leave a digital footprint or written footprint. But then, you might want to sell some and help people. And in order to help people, they're going to have to buy it. So you're talking about niches and areas of who you want to attract. Dude, you're attracting city folks, 600,000 or 700,000 or however many millions of people that live in the Milwaukee area are going to read this book. And then people in Chicago are going to hear about it, in Detroit and Cleveland, and then you got all these big cities in the Midwest. I think you're going to help a lot of people with your book, your memoir, and talking about growing up, and then they can now point to you and say, look, this dude is a successful high school physical education teacher. He took on trying to go through the coaching ranks as a high school and a college coach, and now here he is telling and sharing his story. So motivating. Where can people pre-order your book? As I mentioned earlier on, that it's going to be out and released, I believe, Monday, February 16th of this year. Talk about that. Yeah,
so Echoes of Stark Park is available now for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and any other major retail
outlets,
business that sells books. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And what are your plans for promoting your book? Because I got to assume that once this comes out and people start to read the reviews, there's going to be different book stores in Madison that are familiar with you. And we talked about doing something in the town I work in Wanakee, of having you come to the public library and promote your book. How are you planning on promoting your book?
The plan is to definitely hit the ground running and try to get my story in front of as many people as possible through book tours and signings and workshops and things of that nature. So, I look forward to hitting the state of Wisconsin really hard, because this is where I'm from, born and raised. And, I know a lot of people will resonate with the story, whether they're from Milwaukee or anywhere else throughout the state.
Good stuff. And we already talked about this, and I touched on it here just a little bit ago. What is Freddie Owens doing now? For those Badger fans that, whatever happened to that dude that hit the shot in the corner? Freddie Owens, where's that guy now? What's he doing? Just briefly talk about what you're doing present day. Like, where do you go tomorrow? You get the Sunday scaries today because we're filming on Sunday the 11th. What gets you a little Sunday scary? What gets the Sunday scaries going for tomorrow?
Yeah, so Freddie is a bald, middle-aged man right now. with a 3-year-old toddler. I'm a dad now, man, and I'm just enjoying family time and being a dad and watching my kid form and shape into what he's becoming. Every day and every week is something new with him, and he's got a big personality. He's a combination of me and his mom, and it's so entertaining because every day, he either says something or does something. It gets me going. And, I just look forward to many more moments with him, especially, being a coach for so long and the grind that comes with that. I have a lot of time now where I can start experiencing different areas of life. I've taken on a lot of different projects. I became a teacher 2 years ago, got my licensing for that, and teach high school physical education and PE at Green Bay West High School. So I'm able to continue to impact the youth in that way. I've taken on other projects. I taught myself how to landscape. I started finishing our basement. I didn't know anything about, landscaping or, construction or finishing a basement. I've, taught myself how to do those two things. And then, I was able to write a book, things that I would have never been able to do, had I been still coaching. So I'm just trying to take advantage of the time that I have now, because I'm 20 plus years invested in this and even longer, from a player standpoint, when you throw that in there. So just enjoying life and picking up new hobbies and spending time around my family. That's what I enjoy doing most.
Well, our listeners are probably chomping at the bit here. All right, Coach, it's been fascinating listening to Freddie talk and Coach Sikora talk about stories and whatnot. Let's get to the 5 suggestions for thriving. So this is oftentimes where people maybe, listen to the stories, sometimes maybe even fast forward all the way to the 5 suggestions. So being a former teacher, I want people to come out of this with some bullet points. So this is where the subscribers, followers, and listeners take out the notebooks, pens, and pencils and jot some things down. Here are Freddie Owens's 5 suggestions that have allowed him to survive and thrive some early struggles in life and enjoy a career shaped by basketball. Here's what you shared, and I'm going to toss these in underhand softball style. Freddie, can you hit a softball?
I don't know.
I
used to, but
there was a long pause there.
Yeah, I don't know now. Back in my day, I used to get hit one, but it's been a while.
Okay, well, I'll toss it in there, and I will try to hit. I'll try to hit the bat. How does that sound?
I'll swing at it. How does that sound?
There we go. Yeah, and maybe because we know each other so well, we'll be able to get you to connect. All right, here's what you shared, and I'm gonna have you hit these in 60 seconds or less. Number 1, keep showing up consistently. Go ahead and hit that.
Showing up consistently is huge, because no matter what's going on in your life, you have to continue to show up consistently. It just builds character. It builds toughness. It builds resilience. Even when things aren't going well, just showing up and being present can help you get through some of those tough times. Whether you're looking at it from a mentor or mentee standpoint, you can't ever underestimate how important it is to just be there and show up for someone. For me, it paid huge dividends for me later in my life, just having a dad and having a community and having a family that was just showing up consistently for me in all phases of my life. And that helped get me through a lot of tough times.
Love it. Number 2, keep demanding more. Go ahead and hit that.
That's a big one. Just demanding more, whether it's of yourself or of the people in your circle, friends, family members, kids. That demanding more piece will help elevate people to reach the best versions of themselves that they didn't even think was possible. And as it relates to my story, I had a lot of mentors and a lot of family members and parents that always demanded more. Coaches, they demanded more. And that helped shape and mold me into the person I am today, where I'm in a situation where I'm very content and very happy where I am. And happiness doesn't involve being rich and famous and things of that nature. It's just being happy of where you are in your space in life. And for me, having those mentors and those people pushing me throughout my life and demanding more out of me, it helped me. It helped me a lot.
Good stuff. Number 3, keep providing stability. Go ahead and hit that.
The stability piece is huge. When I think back on my childhood and my upbringing, it wasn't always stable, and that's where the basketball piece came in. Basketball was always something where I can go to for stability because the rules don't change, the game didn't change, and, I knew exactly what I was getting when I stepped in between those lines, and that helped me, deal with a lot of the pressures that, young teenage kids from the inner city deal with, that stability. And having a stability of having family and friends around to help guide you through, tough times, like that's just a huge piece. Now, if you're in a situation where you have a stable household and, you have stability in life, then that's even better because it can help spearhead you into becoming something that even you didn't think was possible.
Good stuff. Number 4, keep teaching lessons beyond sports. Go ahead and hit that.
That's a key one. Sports obviously dominate a lot of our society and life, and a lot of people don't look at things beyond sports, especially if you're an athlete or a coach. Everything is so sports driven in today's society that we don't look at what the value that sports brings to creating a life outside of the game. The values that you take, being a good teammate and learning how to work in a group environment, being resilient and being respected and respecting others. And you can go down a list of things that you learn from sports itself, but the lessons beyond the game are important because that's what's going to hold you down, when that ball stops bouncing or when, you can no longer put on that jersey.
A lot of good lessons there, right there, that you just spit out. And number 5, keep being a positive role model. Go ahead and hit that.
That one hits near and dear, especially being a teacher now and being around kids. You see how their lives are impacted by the people that they're around, whether it's peers or adults. Being around a positive role model is huge because people emulate what they see people do or what they hear people say. The same goes for anybody. I don't care how young, how old, you're around positive role models, someone you can look up to, mentors that you can look up to and take ideas from and learn from. That's important. Or on the flip side, the other side of the coin is you're around negative role models and negative people, then odds are you take from that. So, I'm a huge believer in energy, providing positive energy and trying to give people reason to believe in themselves and believe in others. I just think with the world that we live in today, the more positivity, the better.
Powerful stuff from a positive person that I've known for, it's got to be going on close to 20 years now, 25 years. And I've enjoyed our relationship and how it's kind of evolved. And it was intense for the time that you were there in Madison and when I got to know you, and then we took a little break here, and then now we're connecting back at the end of 2025, 26, because, the person you are. If I thought you were a negative person, maybe wouldn't have answered that Facebook message or the phone call, but I just know who you are, and you're a positive person with a positive outlook and a great storyline. And now I'm happy to try to be a cog in the wheel of trying to promote your book and promote some of the things you're doing. And I was a huge Freddie Owens fan back when you were here for the Badgers, and I'm still a Freddie Owens fan now, and maybe more so because you're playing a different role now, and it's one that I want to kind of get involved with any way I can. So what an episode. I'm so glad you could join the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew today. Your story and how you managed to survive a tough start to life and thrive using basketball to change your life is inspiring. Your story reminds us all to have coping skills and mental health tools in the toolbox when a person is met with life's challenges, and despite that, you have survived and are thriving. Our call to action. Freddie Owens just shared his story and how he used basketball to shape his life. He has endured and persevered. Here are Freddie Owens' 5 suggestions that have helped him survive and thrive. Number 1, keep showing up consistently. Number 2, keep demanding more. Number 3, keep providing stability. Number 4, keep teaching lessons beyond sports. And number 5, keep being a positive role model. Final thoughts as we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. Are there any final thoughts? Freddie Owens.
Final thoughts would be for anybody out there, regardless of what situation you're in life, you don't have to let your situation define you. There's always opportunities to rise above. And, as long as you have the right pieces in place and the right support system, you can overcome anything. So my advice would be to dream big and do everything possible to achieve those dreams, because I'm living proof that it can happen. And I'm so thankful for you, Tim, for allowing me the platform to share my story, and I really appreciate it.
I think you got a lot of things coming your way in the near future. And I wish I had a crystal ball to say, hey, in a year from now, this is where Freddie Owens is going to be. But based upon some of the things you're doing now, I think the sky is the limit for you. I think the book and your story are going to open doors that may not have always been there, but they're going to open. There's going to be some other doors that are people are going to be knocking on and asking you to tell their story, asking you to come promote their book. And I will be one of those people that will be knocking on your door and asking you to do some of those things. And I am going to keep tabs on this from afar. And I really hope that things will go well with the book. And I'm just looking forward to it. On our next episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they learn to survive and thrive. If you have a story to share or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.